She was already gloved when they kicked the tent open. Torres was bleeding out on a stretcher, 2 bullets deep, and the woman who stepped out of the dark didn't flinch. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look at the 8 armed Marines crowding her medical tent like they owned it. She looked at Torres, called his blood type before anyone answered, and had a needle in his arm in under 20 seconds. Staff Sergeant Dominic Reyes stood in the rain and watched her hands. They didn't shake. Not once. If this is your first time finding this channel, welcome. Drop the name of your city in the comments right now and let me know how far this story has traveled. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. This one is going to stay with you. The monsoon had been coming down for 6 hours straight by the time Reyes got his team back to the FOB. He counted heads the way he always did. 8 men in, 8 men out. The number was right, but the condition was wrong. Torres was the worst of it. 2 rounds from an ambush that shouldn't have happened, on a road that was supposed to be clear, from an informant who had burned them the moment they moved inland. Reyes had carried Torres himself for the last 2 kilometers through mud that tried to swallow his boots with every step. He hadn't put him down once. The medical tent was the only light on the entire base. Reyes hit the flap with his shoulder, and the team poured in behind him. "Medic! I need a medic right now!" The woman came from behind a supply cabinet, not running, moving. There is a difference, and Reyes clocked it immediately. Running is panic. What she was doing was controlled speed, which is something different and something harder to learn. She was young. He registered that, and then set it aside because her hands were already moving and her eyes were already on Torres, and nothing else in the room existed to her. "Get him on the table," she said. Not a question, not a suggestion. A fact stated in advance. 2 of Reyes's men lifted Torres onto the examination table, and she was already there, cutting away the field dressing that Reyes had applied in the dark 40 minutes ago. Her scissors moved in short, exact strokes. No wasted motion. "Blood type," she said. "A positive," Reyes answered. "Good." She didn't look up. "I have plenty of that. What's his name?" "Torres. Lance Corporal Danny Torres. He's 22 years old." She looked at Torres's face for exactly 1 second. "Danny, you hear me? I've got you. Keep your eyes open." Torres groaned something that might have been yes. She was already on the IV. First attempt, clean line, no digging. Reyes had seen field medics with 10 years of experience miss a vein twice before they got it. This woman hit it like she had done it 10,000 times in the dark. "How long ago was he hit?" she asked. "Approximately 45 minutes, maybe 50. "Field dressing applied when?" "Right after, maybe 2 minutes after contact." She nodded, examining the wounds with her fingers moving fast but careful. 2 entry points, left thigh and lower abdomen. The thigh is bad but manageable. The abdomen is what worries me. She reached for the overhead light and pulled it down closer. "I need everyone except the 2 men holding this light to step back. Give me room to work." The Marines stepped back. All of them, without being told twice. Reyes stood close enough to see, but far enough to stay out of her way. He watched her hands. He watched her face. The tent was loud with rain hammering the canvas roof and the sound of generators and the distant noise of the base returning to its nighttime rhythm. None of it touched her. She was somewhere else entirely. A place where only the patient existed. "Is he going to make it?" Reyes asked. "Ask me in 10 minutes, she said, not unkindly. "Right now, I need you to be quiet and let me work." Nobody in 8 years of service had ever told Dominic Reyes to be quiet and had him comply without pushback. He was quiet. She worked for 11 minutes without stopping. At one point, she called for a specific instrument by its exact clinical name. Not field slang, not a nickname. The precise term. And the base corpsman who came in to assist had to ask her to repeat it because he didn't recognize the terminology. She repeated it without irritation, described the instrument by function instead, and had it in her hand before the corpsman finished handing it over. Torres was still breathing. His color, which had gone gray in the field, was coming back by degrees. "Okay," she said finally, stepping back just far enough to breathe. "He's stable. The abdominal wound is a through and through, no bowel perforation from what I can tell without imaging. He needs to go to Zamboanga for surgery, but he will make the flight. He will make it." Reyes exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. "Thank you," he said. She was already moving to the next thing, checking the IV flow rate, writing something on a small notepad. "Don't thank me yet. He still needs that surgery. Who else is hurt?" 3 other men raised hands, or were raised by the men standing next to them. She went through them in order of severity, not order of rank, not order of seniority, severity. She triaged 4 Marines in 18 minutes, treating 2 herself and directing the corpsman through the other 2 with instructions that were so specific and so steady that the corpsman moved faster than Reyes had ever seen him move, like her certainty was contagious. When she got to Reyes last, he tried to wave her off. "I'm fine. I'm the last priority." "You have a laceration above your left eye that needs closing," she said, "and you're favoring your right knee. Sit." "I said I'm fine." She looked at him. It was a calm look, patient and utterly unmoved. "Sergeant, I have been watching you compensate for that knee since you walked in. If you leave it tonight, it will swell to twice its size by morning, and you will be useless to your team for 3 days. Sit down and let me look at it. That is not a request." Reyes sat down. He told himself it was because she was right about the knee. She examined the laceration first, cleaning it with practiced efficiency, and then began closing it with sutures that were the neatest, most precise stitchwork Reyes had ever seen outside a hospital operating room. Each pass of the needle was identical to the last, the tension consistent, the spacing exact. "Where'd you train?" he asked, watching her hands. "Medical school," she said. "Which one? Does it matter right now?" "I'm making conversation." She tied off a suture. "Johns Hopkins, and then some additional training after." "Additional training where?" A pause. Small, but there. "Different places. Hold still." Reyes held still, but he filed the pause away. "You do this kind of work long?" he asked. "Long enough. Most civilian contractors I've worked with, they're good people, experienced people, but they show the stress." He kept his voice conversational, easy. "Combat injuries are different from hospital injuries. The circumstances, the conditions. Even the best civilian trauma doctors, they show something. A tell. You don't." She didn't answer immediately. She finished the suture line and stepped back to examine her work. Then she looked at him directly, and it was the first time since they'd come in that she looked at anyone full in the face for more than a functional second. "Some people adapt," she said. "Some people train," Reyes replied. Something moved behind her eyes. Just a flicker, there and gone. "Your name's Reyes," she said. Not a question. She had heard it used by his men. "Dominic Reyes, Staff Sergeant, 3rd Marine Raider Battalion." "Maya Callahan," she said. "Civilian trauma contractor." She said it the way people say things that are mostly true. Reyes nodded slowly. "Well, Maya Callahan, I owe you one." "You owe Torres one," she corrected, moving to wash her hands at the small basin by the supply wall. "He did the hard part. He stayed alive long enough for me to help him." Reyes stood, testing the knee. She had wrapped it while they talked, firm and precise, and it already felt better. He looked across the tent at Torres, who was resting now with color in his face and steady breath moving his chest. 8 men in, 8 men out. The number was still right. "Get some sleep, Sergeant," Maya said, her back to him as she restocked her supplies in the methodical way of someone who had learned the hard way that disorganized supplies cost lives. "You've got a long day tomorrow." Reyes pulled on his jacket and moved toward the tent opening. He stopped with his hand on the flap. There was a moment, just before he stepped out, when he glanced back. Maya was organizing her instruments under the worklight, her long dark hair loose around her shoulders, dried blood still on her forearms that she hadn't noticed or hadn't bothered with. She looked 22 years old at most. She looked like someone's younger sister. She looked like someone who had absolutely no business being in a jungle FOB 2 hours from the nearest city, doing what she had just done with hands that didn't shake. And that was the thing that stayed with Reyes through the wet walk back to his billet and through the thin hours of sleep that followed. The hands. Because hands like that don't come from reading about trauma medicine. They don't come from classroom rotations or civilian ER residencies. They come from doing the thing in the conditions where the thing actually happens. In the dark. Under fire. When the alternative is watching someone die. Reyes had been in special operations long enough to recognize that truth when he saw it. He just didn't know yet how far down that truth went. 3 days passed before Reyes went back to the medical tent. He told himself it was routine. Torres had been airlifted to Zamboanga the morning after the ambush, stable enough for surgery, and the operating team there had confirmed what Maya said, word for word. Through and through. No bowel perforation. Clean. She had called it in the dark, in a monsoon, with instruments that belonged in a hospital, not a jungle outpost. Reyes told himself he was just following up on a medical visit, checking the sutures on his forehead the way any responsible non-commissioned officer would. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. The truth was simpler and harder to explain. Something about Maya Callahan had been sitting in the back of his chest like a splinter since the night she gloved up before he even finished yelling for help. He had been in special operations for 12 years. He had worked alongside CIA field officers, JSOC advisors, intelligence contractors, and military liaisons who operated under identities that weren't entirely their own. He knew what that looked like from the inside. He just had never seen it look like a 22-year-old woman with dark hair and steady hands in a medical tent in the Philippine jungle. He started quietly, asking around, not directly, not obviously, because directness in a place like this was a fast way to get nowhere. He talked to the base operations sergeant about contractor rotations. He mentioned Maya's name casually to 2 of the senior NCOs who'd been at the FOB longest. He asked the supply sergeant how contractors got assigned to this particular base versus the larger facility at Zamboanga, which had actual surgical capacity and actual support staff and actual amenities. What he got back was not much, which was itself something. Maya Callahan's paperwork was immaculate. Contractor credentials through a registered medical staffing agency. Background check clear. Medical certifications current and verified. Security clearance at the appropriate level for her stated role. Everything in order. Everything exactly as it should be. And yet nobody remembered who had specifically requested her for this posting. Nobody could name the person who signed off on placing someone with her clearance level at a remote FOB that most experienced contractors actively avoided. Her file existed. Her assignment existed. The reason for that specific assignment, in that specific location, did not seem to exist anywhere that Reyes could find, without raising flags he wasn't ready to raise. He went back to the tent on a Tuesday afternoon, when the base was quiet, and the heat pressed down on everything like a hand. Maya was restocking supplies when he walked in. She looked up, and her expression did the thing he'd noticed before. A fraction of a second where something moved behind her eyes, something alert and assessing. And then it was gone, and she was professional and calm and pleasant. "Sergeant Reyes," she said, "how's the knee?" "Solid," he said. "Wanted you to check the sutures." She gestured to the cot. He sat. She examined the stitches with clean hands and a small light, her face close enough that he could see the thin scar along her jawline. He had noticed it the first night, but hadn't focused on it. Now he did. It was old, well healed, faded to the color of old paper, but its shape was specific. Not a clean line from glass or a kitchen accident. It curved. The kind of curve that came from shrapnel moving at velocity, and luck being the only reason it caught the jaw instead of the throat. "Healing well," she said, stepping back. "You can leave the sutures another few days. Come back Thursday and I'll take them out." "Sure," Reyes said. He didn't move toward the door. Maya went back to her supplies. She was organized in a way that looked habitual rather than trained, meaning she didn't have to think about where things went. Her hands found the right shelf without her looking. That kind of organization came from doing the same task in high-stress conditions often enough that the body memorized the sequence, independent of the mind. "Can I ask you something?" Reyes said. "You're going to regardless," she replied. He almost smiled. "That first night, Torres, you called the blood type before anyone answered you." "I asked for the blood type," she corrected, not turning around. "You called it," Reyes said. "There's a difference. You said, and I remember this clearly, you said, A positive. I have plenty of that. You said it before I confirmed." Maya was still for a beat. One beat. Then she continued organizing. "I asked and you confirmed, and I responded. Memory under stress isn't always reliable, Sergeant." "My memory under stress is extremely reliable," Reyes said. "It's part of the job." She turned then, looked at him with that calm, measuring expression. "What is it you're actually asking me?" "I'm asking how someone your age moves the way you move, calls what you call, and works the way you work, in conditions that would rattle people with 20 years of field medicine behind them." She held his gaze for a moment, then pulled a stool from beside the supply cabinet and sat down across from him. Not defensive, not retreating, deciding. "I had a brother," she said. "Older. His name was Daniel. He was a Marine, 2 combat tours in Mindanao before the drawdown. He came home different. You know what that looks like." Reyes nodded. "PTSD, survivor's guilt. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't be in crowds. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, talking to people who weren't there." Her voice was even. The evenness itself had weight to it. "I was finishing my second year pre-med when he came home. I changed my specialty to trauma medicine because of him. I wanted to understand what those conditions did to a body and a mind. I wanted to be somewhere that mattered." "What happened to him?" Reyes asked. The pause that followed was not rehearsed. It was real, and it lasted long enough to mean something. "He didn't make it," she said. 2 years after he got home. His own hand. "I'm sorry," Reyes said. He meant it without qualification. "After that I couldn't do a regular hospital," she continued. "I couldn't do suburban ER shifts and routine procedures knowing what was happening in places like this. I started doing contractor rotations, forward positions, places where the medicine was real and the need was immediate." She met his eyes. "This is where I'm useful. That's the whole story." Reyes listened to every word. He believed the grief in it. He believed the brother and the loss and the decision that followed. What he didn't believe was that grief alone produced hands like hers. "That's a true story," he said carefully. But it doesn't explain the suture technique. Military Medical Corps training. I've seen it before. Not often. But I know what it looks like. Maya looked at him for a long moment. You pick up techniques from different sources when you work in enough field environments. You don't pick up that kind of consistency from exposure, Reyes said. That's repetition under controlled instruction. That's a program. Before she could answer, the tent flap opened hard and fast, and Corporal Hendricks came in with his right arm wrapped in a bloody field dressing he'd applied himself, badly, the bandage already soaked through. Sorry, Hendricks said, his face tight. Perimeter wire got me. It's pretty bad. Maya was off the stool and moving before he finished the sentence. Sit, she said, pointing to the table. Let me see it. She cut away the field dressing with one clean stroke of her trauma shears. The laceration was deep, running from the elbow crease halfway up the forearm, ragged at the edges from the wire's barb. Maya examined it without touching the wound directly, assessing depth and direction, her eyes moving in a fast clinical scan. You're lucky, she said. Deep but clean. Missed the important structures. She looked up at Hendricks. This is going to take time to close properly. You're going to sit still and let me work. Understood? Yes, ma'am, Hendricks said. She turned to prepare the suture kit, and as she did, she pushed her sleeves up to her elbows to keep the fabric clear of the work area. Reyes saw it. Inside her left wrist, small and precise and deliberately placed where a watch would normally cover it. A medical caduceus inside a wreath, jump wings above it, rendered in dark ink with the kind of detail that came from someone who chose the image carefully. His breath didn't change. His posture didn't change. Nothing on his face changed. 12 years of special operations had taught him how to receive information without broadcasting that he'd received it. But his mind moved fast and hard. He knew that tattoo. Every operator in the special operations community knew that tattoo, because it was the kind of thing you heard about more than you saw. The kind of thing that existed in the same category as other things that were technically unconfirmed, but universally understood among people who worked in the classified spaces of American military power. It was the mark of a specific unit, a unit whose members carried no public record of their service, a unit whose medical operators were embedded in the most sensitive, most dangerous, most deniable operations the United States military ran anywhere in the world. And one of them was standing 3 feet away from him, closing a laceration on a Marine corporal's forearm with the same steady hands that had kept Torres alive in the rain. Reyes sat with that knowledge and did not move. He watched her work through Hendricks's sutures with the same economy and precision he had cataloged the first night. Watched the way she positioned her body automatically toward the tent opening whenever she wasn't bent over the patient. Watched the way she kept her peripheral vision active even while her primary focus was on the wound in front of her. She wasn't just trained in medicine. She was trained to survive in the same environments where the medicine was needed. When she finished with Hendricks and sent him out with care instructions, she straightened and turned and found Reyes still sitting on the cot, watching her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Reyes said, quietly and without performance, "That's quite a tattoo." Maya's hand stopped moving. She looked down at her wrist. Then she looked at him. The careful, professional expression she had worn since the first night shifted. Not collapsed, shifted. Like something underneath it moved and then held in a new position. "I don't know what you think you saw," she said. "I think," Reyes said, keeping his voice low and steady, "that I know exactly what I saw. And I think you've known since the first night that eventually someone was going to figure it out." Maya held his gaze across the tent. Outside, the base went on with its ordinary sounds. Vehicles, voices, generators. None of it aware of what was happening in the medical tent between a Marine staff sergeant and a woman who was not who her paperwork said she was. "Sergeant Reyes," she said finally, and her voice was different now. Quieter, more direct, stripped of the smooth civilian contractor register she had been using. "There are operations running in this region that go beyond anything your team has been briefed on, and there are people who need to be positioned in specific places to support those operations." "I know how that works," Reyes said. "Then you know," she said, "that some of those people depend on no one asking the kind of questions you've been asking." Reyes looked at her, at the young face and the old eyes and the scar along her jaw, and the tattoo she had almost covered. "The problem," he said, "is that I've already asked them." The conversation ended without resolution, because conversations like that one never resolve cleanly. Maya had looked at him across the medical tent with those steady green eyes and said nothing more, and Reyes had walked out into the heavy afternoon heat, carrying the weight of what he now knew and no clear answer for what to do with it. He spent the rest of that day turning it over. Not the fact of who she was. That part had settled into place with the quiet certainty of something that had always been true and only needed to be named. What he turned over was the why of it. Why here? Why this base? This remote, underfunded FOB, 2 hours from anything that could be called infrastructure. Why someone carrying that tattoo and those hands and whatever operational history lived behind both of them was spending her days treating perimeter wire lacerations and monsoon infections when she was clearly built for something else entirely. He didn't have an answer by nightfall. The answer came at 4:17 in the morning, when the alert siren split the base open like a blade. Reyes was on his feet before the sound fully registered, muscle memory moving his body while his mind was still catching up. Around him, his team was doing the same. Boots, vest, weapon. The choreography of men who had responded to emergency calls enough times that the body had memorized the sequence without consulting the brain. Lieutenant Commander Ferris came through the door with his jaw set and his eyes hard. "Classified direct action mission went sideways," Ferris said, already moving through the room while the team geared up around him. "Mixed Special Operations Task Force hit a compound in the interior, targeting a high-value arms broker. They had the target. Then they didn't. Now they've got 4 critically wounded pinned inside a partially destroyed structure with 2 other operators, limited ammunition, no medical support, and an insurgent element holding 3 approaches." "What do we have for assets?" Reyes asked, pulling the last strap on his vest. "We're the closest extraction unit. Helicopter is spun up. We have a 12-minute window before that window closes." Reyes moved toward the door, and Ferris said the thing that stopped him mid-step. "There's a medical officer embedded with the task force. Specialized clearance. She went in as support for the operation, and she's trapped with the wounded." Reyes turned. "She." Ferris met his eyes. "That's all I have. We move in 8 minutes." 8 minutes. Reyes finished gearing and said nothing. His mind was already ahead of his body, already in the helicopter, already doing the math on what he knew and what it meant, and why none of this felt like coincidence. The ride to the target area was 11 minutes of noise and tension, and Reyes spending the entire time watching the dark terrain move below them and thinking about Maya Callahan. About the tattoo on her wrist. About the way she'd said, "There are operations running in this region that go beyond anything your team has been briefed on." About the way she'd positioned herself near the tent opening every single time someone walked in. She hadn't been waiting for a patient. She'd been maintaining situational awareness. "LZ is hot," the pilot called. "I can get you close, but you are on your own the moment those skids touch." Reyes checked his weapon and looked at his team. 7 faces he trusted with his life. 7 men who were about to go into something they hadn't been fully briefed on. because there wasn't time. "We go in, we find the pinned element, we get everyone out," Reyes said. "Priority on wounded. Nobody gets left." 7 heads nodded. The helicopter touched, and they hit the ground running. The firefight was audible before they crested the first ridge. Sustained automatic weapons fire rolling through the hills in waves, punctuated by the sharp, distinct crack of precision shooting from inside the compound. Whoever was pinned down was still fighting. That was something. Ferris directed the approach using hand signals, moving the team along the high ground to get eyes on the compound layout before committing to a direction. Reyes crested the ridge beside him and saw the tactical picture in one fast assessment. Stone structure in the center. 3 insurgent positions covering the approaches. Muzzle flashes from 2 windows on the second level, which meant the pinned element was still active and still disciplined enough to manage their fire. "We need to pull their attention," Reyes said into the radio. "All 3 positions simultaneously. 30 seconds of maximum noise from the high ground draws them up and off the structure. That's when we push through." Ferris was already relaying the plan. What followed was the kind of coordinated chaos that looked from the outside like violence, and felt from the inside like mathematics. Reyes's team created the diversion with everything they had, and in the confusion, Ferris led 2 men down the slope and through the gap and into the compound, while Reyes held the high ground and kept the pressure on. Through his earpiece, he heard Ferris breathing hard. Then Ferris's voice, clipped and urgent. "We're in. I have eyes on the pinned element. 2 operators, 4 wounded, and 1 additional." A pause. "She's been working on them this whole time." Reyes kept firing. "What's her status?" Another pause, longer, and the length of it was its own kind of answer. "She's hit," Ferris said. "She's still working." The extraction took 19 minutes from breach to helicopter. 19 minutes of controlled violence and impossible coordination. 4 critically wounded men moved through active fire, 2 operators providing cover from the inside, while Reyes's team pressed the insurgent positions from the high ground hard enough and fast enough to collapse the perimeter before it could reorganize. Maya was the last one out. Reyes saw her when Ferris brought her through the final breach point. Her left arm hung wrong, the shoulder pulled in a way that meant something structural had given. Her camouflage pants were soaked dark on one leg from a through-and-through that she had dressed herself, in the field, while performing surgery on other people. She was walking because she refused not to walk, and the refusal was visible in every step, the jaw set, the eyes forward, the free hand steady at her side. Ferris tried to take her arm, and she pulled away. "I'm the last priority," she said. "Get your wounded on the helicopter." "You are wounded," Ferris said. "I'm ambulatory," she replied. "They're not. Move." Ferris moved, because there was something in her voice that didn't invite argument. Reyes had heard that register before. It was the voice of someone who had already done the math and knew exactly how much they could afford to spend before the account ran dry. On the helicopter, Reyes positioned himself across from her while the medics worked on the 4 critically wounded operators. The aircraft noise made conversation difficult. He watched her instead. She was watching the medics work, tracking their hands, following the sequence of interventions with the focused attention of someone who needed to know that the work being done correctly. One of the medics called out that the Marine with the femoral injury was destabilizing, blood pressure dropping. And before Reyes registered the words, Maya was already leaning across the space between them, with her good arm extended. "Left side," she said. "The pressure point is left side, up 2 centimeters. You're compensating for the wrong branch." The medic adjusted. The Marine's pressure stabilized. Maya sat back and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and went back to watching. The medic looked at her, then at Reyes, then back at his patient. When they landed at Zamboanga and the wounded were rushed off the aircraft, the ground medical team came for Maya, and she let them take her this time. Not because she stopped resisting, because she had reached the edge of what willpower could substitute for blood volume, and her body had already begun making the decision for her. Reyes watched them load her onto a stretcher and felt something in his chest he did not immediately have a name for. Then one of the ground medics did something that made every operator within 20 feet go completely still. Working fast, the medic cut away Maya's blood-soaked top to access the shoulder wound. And in that moment, under the airfield lights, what had been hidden became visible. An American flag tattoo above her left collarbone, unit citations along her ribs rendered in small, precise text, and across her upper back, partially visible around the field dressing on the shoulder, a set of wings spanning the width of her shoulder blades, with a medical cross at the center and a designation below it that Reyes could read from where he stood. He read it twice. Then he stood very still for a moment, while the world rearranged itself into a new shape around him. Air Force Pararescue, Deep Cover Medical Specialist designation. The kind that didn't appear in any personnel file accessible below a certain classification level. The kind that was issued to fewer than 15 active operators in the entire United States military. The people who went behind enemy lines to bring back the wounded from missions that officially did not happen. Part medic, part operator, trained to work in conditions that would end most people before the first hour was over. Ferris appeared at Reyes's shoulder and looked at what Reyes was looking at. "You knew," Reyes said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, looking for confirmation. Ferris was quiet for a moment. "I knew she was embedded at the FOB for a reason. I didn't know her full profile until the mission alert came through tonight." "She was positioned there from the beginning," Reyes said. "The whole 7 months. Medical support for whatever those classified interdiction missions were running through this region. Torres, the night we came in, she wasn't just treating casualties. She was doing exactly what she was positioned to do." Ferris nodded slowly. "And tonight," Reyes said, "she performed field surgery in the middle of a firefight, with a round through her shoulder, in the dark, and kept a man with a clipped femoral artery alive long enough to reach this airfield." "Yes," Ferris said. Reyes looked at the entrance to the medical facility where they had taken her. At the doors that had closed behind the stretcher. "She told me she was there to be where the dying happened, before the dying finished," Reyes said, half to himself. The words had a different weight now than they'd had when she said them. Ferris put a hand briefly on Reyes's shoulder. "Get your team debriefed and get some rest. Briefing at 0600. He walked away. Reyes stood where he was for another moment, looking at those closed doors, thinking about a 22-year-old woman who had gone into a burning building and refused to come out until everyone else was safe. Thinking about the steady hands and the scar on the jaw and the tattoo she had worn in plain sight and trusted the watch to cover. Thinking about how the problem, as he had told her just hours ago, was that he had already asked the questions. He understood now what she had meant when she didn't answer. The problem wasn't that he'd asked. The problem was that now he knew. And knowing changed everything about what came next. The briefing at 0600 lasted 40 minutes and answered exactly none of the questions Reyes actually had. Ferris walked the team through the operational overview in the clipped, factual language of someone reading from a document they couldn't show anyone in the room. The arms trafficking network, the 7 months of intelligence gathering, the series of interdiction missions that had been running through the region under classifications that sat above Reyes's clearance level. The high-value target who had slipped the net the night before and was now 3 borders away and effectively untouchable. The operation was over. That was the summary. 7 months of work, a blown cover, 4 wounded operators, and a result that the people who wrote the orders would file under incomplete rather than failed, because the language of classified operations preferred euphemism to honesty. Reyes sat through all of it, and when Faris finished, he asked one question. "What's her status?" Faris looked at him for a moment. "Surgery went well. She's in recovery. The shoulder will need time, but there's no permanent damage. The leg wound was clean. She'll be operational again in 8 to 12 weeks. And her cover?" Faris's expression answered before his words did. "Blown. Completely." Between the extraction, the witnesses, and the tactical circumstances, Maya Callahan, as a civilian contractor, no longer exists as a viable identity. Command is making arrangements. "What kind of arrangements?" "That's above this briefing," Faris said. "Dismissed." Reyes spent the rest of that morning doing the ordinary work of after action. Equipment checks, team debrief, report filing. The mechanical routine that followed every operation, regardless of how it ended, because the military understood that structure was what kept men functional when the adrenaline stopped and the weight of what had happened settled in. He went to the recovery ward in the early afternoon. Maya was sitting up when he walked in. Arm in a sling, the shoulder wrapped and immobilized, a medical journal open in her lap. She looked up when she heard him, and something in her face settled. Not relaxed exactly, but recalibrated. The way a person's expression changes when someone enters the room and they no longer have to be alone with their own thoughts. "Sergeant Reyes," she said. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pulling a chair close and sitting without asking permission. "Like someone put a round through my shoulder," she said. "Which is accurate." "The femoral case on the helicopter," Reyes said. "The medic was compensating for the wrong branch. You caught it from across the aircraft, with a through and through in your leg and a dislocated shoulder." "Subluxation," she corrected, "not full dislocation. And the pressure point correction was obvious. Anyone paying attention would have caught it." "No," Reyes said. "They wouldn't have. I was paying attention, and I didn't catch it." She looked at him, said nothing. But she didn't deflect it the way she would have 3 days ago. Reyes leaned forward with his forearms on his knees. "I know your name," he said quietly. "Your real one. Faris told me this morning. Enough of it to fill in what I already figured out." Maya closed the medical journal, set it on the bed beside her. Her good hand rested flat on the cover, and Reyes watched her fingers, those steady, precise fingers, pressed gently against the surface as if grounding herself through the contact. "Captain Maya Jin Callahan," Reyes said. "United States Air Force." She didn't confirm it with words. She didn't need to. The way she held herself changed in the fraction of a second after he said it. Not collapse. Something more like relief. The particular exhaustion of a person who has been carrying a false name for so long that hearing their real one feels like setting down a weight they forgot they were holding. "How long?" Reyes asked. 7 months at the FOB, she said. 14 months total in this region under the current operational identity. 14 months, Reyes said. The FOB assignment was the 3rd posting. There were 2 before it. She paused. You build a cover over time. You build the habits that match the story, the way you talk, the way you move in public, the details that make a person real to the people around them. Her jaw tightened slightly. After a while, you stop having to think about it. That's when you know the cover has taken. And that's also when it starts to cost something you don't have a name for yet. Reyes was quiet for a moment. What happened the night of the mission? Walk me through it from your position. She looked at him, assessing whether the question was operational curiosity or something else. Then she answered, I was embedded with a task force as forward medical support for the breach element. The plan called for a clean entry, target acquisition, and extraction inside 20 minutes. Standard parameters for that kind of direct action. Her voice was level, factual, the voice of someone giving a report. The target had internal security we hadn't fully mapped. Contact started 40 seconds after breach. We had casualties in the first 2 minutes. 4 wounded in 2 minutes, Reyes said. 3 in the first 2 minutes. The 4th went down trying to pull the 3rd out of the open. She looked at her hands. I had a Marine with a femoral bleed, 2 operators with torso wounds, and a 4th with a traumatic brain injury from a concussive blast. In a partially collapsed structure, in the dark, with active fire coming through 2 exterior walls. And you, Reyes said. When did you get hit? The shoulder was the 3rd or 4th minute. I didn't stop to assess it. You performed surgery for 2 hours with a round in your shoulder. It wasn't surgery, she said, with something close to irritation. It was damage control. Keeping people alive long enough for actual surgery. There's a difference. Maya, Reyes said. She stopped. It was the first time he had used her real first name, and they both registered it. Something in the room shifted, not dramatically, quietly, the way important things usually shift. You kept 4 men alive, he said, in conditions that would have finished most people in the first 30 minutes. That's what happened. Whatever language you want to use for it. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, smaller, not weaker, just closer to something true. Daniel didn't have anyone in that position when he needed it, she said. Not in the field and not when he came home. There was no one who knew exactly where the bleeding was and how to stop it. She looked up. I became that person because he didn't have one. I went where I went because that's where those people are. The ones who need someone to know exactly where the bleeding is. Reyes sat with that. He had heard versions of this story before, people who turned personal loss into professional purpose. It was a common enough human response to grief. But most people who did that became counselors or advocates or researchers. They didn't spend 14 months under a false name in one of the most operationally dangerous regions in the Pacific, performing emergency surgery in active fire, and walking out last. What happens now? He asked. Now, she said, Captain Maya Jin Callahan gets reassigned to a training and doctrine position at a major Air Force installation stateside. A pause that carried everything she didn't say about that. Maya Callahan, civilian contractor, gets permanently retired from every database that had her. The missions she supported get sealed. The 7 months at the FOB get filed somewhere no one below a certain clearance level will ever read them. And you become a flight surgeon at a base somewhere? With a commissary and a parking lot, Reyes said. Yes. How do you feel about that? She considered the question as if it had not occurred to her to have feelings about it and was now, for the first time, checking. I feel like Torres went home, she said. Reyes nodded. And the 4 operators from last night, she continued, they'll go home too. Or they'll come back to full operational capacity and do this again somewhere else, which is also a form of going home for people like that. She exhaled slowly. That's what I feel about it. Reyes stood, moved to the window, and looked out at the flight line, then back at her. There's something I need to tell you, he said, and I want you to hear it as a factual report, not as something I'm saying to make you feel better. She looked at him. The 2 operators who were still active when we breached that structure, Reyes said. They both told Ferris the same thing independently, before anyone compared accounts. They said they stayed in that fight because she was still working. Because as long as she was still working, They knew there was something worth fighting to protect inside that building. He held her gaze. You were the reason they held the position. 2 trained special operations soldiers held a perimeter under sustained fire for 2 hours because they looked at you and decided the ground was worth keeping. Maya's composure held. She was trained for composure. She had worn it for 14 months like a second uniform. But her hand, the steady, certain hand that had put needles in veins in the dark and sutured wounds by flashlight and held pressure on ephemeral bleed for 40 continuous minutes, that hand pressed harder against the medical journal cover, and the knuckles went briefly, visibly white. "I didn't know that," she said. "I know," Reyes said. The silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need filling. After a moment, she said, "How's your knee?" He almost laughed. "Solid. Your wrap held." "Good." She picked up the journal again, then set it back down. Reyes. Dominic. The first time she had used his given name. "Thank you for coming after us. For pushing the breach when the situation said to hold back." "We don't leave people behind," Reyes said. "That's not sentiment. That's policy." "I know," she said, "but it matters anyway." He moved toward the door, then stopped, because there was one more thing, and he had been deciding whether to say it since he walked in. "The story about Daniel," he said. "Your brother. Was all of it true?" Her expression didn't change in the way he expected. It didn't close or deflect. It opened, just slightly, in the way that things open when they are finally allowed to. "Every word," she said. His name was Daniel Jin, United States Marine Corps. 2 tours in Mindanao before the drawdown. He came home and he couldn't find his way back to being a person who lived in ordinary time. Her voice stayed even, but the evenness cost her something. He was 26 years old. I was 19. I didn't know yet what I know now about where the bleeding was. Reyes stood in the doorway and held that image. A 19-year-old girl watching her brother disappear in slow motion and not having the tools yet to stop it. Then spending the next 3 years acquiring every tool that existed. Then going to the places where those tools were needed and using them without asking for credit or acknowledgement or any record that could be read by anyone who might say thank you. He would have been proud, Reyes said. It was a simple thing to say. It was also the only true thing left to say. Maya looked at him across the recovery ward, and for one unguarded moment, she was not Captain Maya Jin Callahan of the United States Air Force, or Maya Callahan, the civilian contractor, or the para-rescue deep cover specialist with the steady hands and the old eyes. She was a 22-year-old woman who had lost her brother and decided that the loss meant something, and then gone out into the hardest places she could find to prove it. "Close the door on your way out," she said quietly. He did. In the corridor outside, Reyes stood still for a moment, with his hand flat against the closed door. He could hear the flight line through the building walls. Engines, movement, the ordinary machinery of a military installation, continuing its work, regardless of what any individual inside it was carrying. He pushed off the door and walked. Behind him, in the recovery ward, the woman who had 2 names and 1 truth was already reaching for her medical journal again. Because that was what she did. She went back to work. She always went back to work. That was the whole story. That had always been the whole story. The problem was that it wasn't over yet. The problem, as Reyes had said, was that he already knew, and knowledge in the world of classified operations did not sit still. It moved. It connected to other things. It changed the shape of every room you walked into afterward, because you were no longer the same person who had walked into the room before. Reyes spent his last 4 days at Zamboanga doing what he was supposed to do. Reports, debrief sessions, equipment accounting, The bureaucratic aftermath of an operation that had officially concluded, even if the feeling of it had not. His team was being rotated back to their primary staging base in 2 days, and from there, most of them would cycle home on leave. Torres was already stateside, recovering at a military medical center in California, sending short messages through the unit's informal communication channels that said things like, "Tell whoever did my field dressing she saved my life. And also, my mom says thank you." Reyes read that message 3 times. He went back to the recovery ward on his second-to-last day, not because he had new information or a specific purpose, but because he had learned something over 12 years of special operations that most people took much longer to learn. You said the things that needed saying when you had the opportunity to say them, because the opportunity was never guaranteed to come again. Maya was out of the sling. Not by medical authorization, he suspected, but because she had decided that her shoulder had recovered sufficiently for limited use, and she was not the kind of person who waited for paperwork to confirm what her own body was telling her. She was working through a series of careful movements with her left arm when he walked in, testing range of motion with the focused expression of someone conducting a clinical assessment on themselves. She stopped when she saw him. "You're going to tear the repair," he said. "I'm not going to tear the repair," she said. "I know exactly where the repair is, and I am nowhere near its load threshold. Sit down." He sat. She continued the movement sequence for another 30 seconds, and then stopped, satisfied with whatever data she had collected, and turned to face him. "You leave tomorrow," she said. It was not a question. The base was small, and departure schedules moved through the informal information network faster than official communication. "Day after," he said. "You?" "End of the week. There are transition protocols, documentation that has to be processed before a cover gets formally retired." Something moved across her face. Not grief exactly. The particular tiredness of someone who has done an enormous thing and is now required to do the considerably less enormous, but considerably more tedious thing of filling out the forms that close the file on the enormous thing. Maya Callahan gets a formal termination of contract, direct deposit of final payment into an account that will be closed by Monday. Official record shows she requested reassignment due to personal circumstances and was honorably released. She paused. "And then she stops existing." "And Captain Jin Callahan?" Reyes asked. "Reports to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio in 3 weeks. Training and doctrine. Teaching the next generation of flight surgeons the things that don't make it into the curriculum." A dry, quiet pause. "The things you only learn by going where the curriculum doesn't cover." Reyes nodded. Then he said the thing he had come to say. "Torres sent a message through the unit channel," he said. "He wanted me to tell you that his field dressing saved his life." Maya's expression didn't change immediately. Then, quietly, it did. "He should know it wasn't just the field dressing," she said. "His own body did most of the work. He's young and strong, and he fought hard to stay." "He knows that too," Reyes said. "He wanted you to know the other part." She was quiet for a moment, looking at a fixed point past his shoulder. Then she said, "How is he?" "Surgery went clean. They repaired the muscle damage. Physical therapy started this week. His mother flew in from Corpus Christi and apparently has not left the hospital since." Reyes watched her face. "He's going to walk out of there on his own legs. The doctor said 6 weeks." Maya closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, they were clear and focused, but the 2 seconds had been real. "Good," she said. "That's good." Reyes leaned forward. There was something else, and she sensed it before he said it. He could see that in the way she stilled. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it completely before you respond," he said. She waited. Command reviewed the full operational record from the past 7 months last night. Every mission that your embedded position supported, every medical intervention logged and cross-referenced against outcomes. He held her gaze. 11 operators who would be in the ground right now are instead in various stages of recovery or back on active duty. 11. Across 3 different classified mission sets, across 7 months, in conditions that ranged from bad to the kind of thing that doesn't get written down in language anyone would recognize. Maya said nothing. They are recommending a commendation at the highest classification level the Air Force can issue, Reyes said, which means approximately 6 people will ever know it exists. There will be no ceremony, no public record. Your family won't receive a letter. It goes in a file that gets reviewed once every 10 years by people with the right clearance, and then gets sealed again. He watched her face while he said it, watched her absorb the information that her 14 months of work, the cover and the jungle and the firefight and the shoulder and every patient she had kept alive in conditions that defied what medicine was supposed to be able to do, would be officially recognized by a document no one would ever read. "Okay," she said. Just that. "Okay," he repeated. "That's your response." "What response were you expecting?" "I don't know," Reyes said honestly. "Something larger." She looked at him with those steady green eyes that had looked at Torres and seen exactly what needed to be done before anyone else in the room had processed the situation. "Dominic," she said, "I didn't go to those places because I wanted a record of going. I went because Daniel didn't have someone there when he needed someone there, and because every person who was in those places was someone's Daniel." She paused. "The commendation is for the institution. It's how the institution processes the thing. I don't need the institution to process it for me. I already know what happened." Reyes sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Can I tell you something that isn't in any report and won't be in any file?" She waited. "The night we extracted you," he said, "the 2 operators who held that structure, Sergeant First Class Bauer and Chief Warrant Officer Delgado. I talked to both of them yesterday, separately, before they flew out." He paused, making sure she was with him. "Both of them said the same thing, word for word, without having compared accounts. I asked them why they held the position as long as they did, given the tactical situation, given the odds. Both of them said the same 4 words." Maya was very still. "She was still working," Reyes said. The silence in the room was complete for a full 5 seconds. "They held that ground for 2 hours, Reyes continued, "because they looked at you working on those wounded men in the dark, and they decided that any ground that contained what you were doing was ground worth keeping. You were not just the medical support for that mission. You were the reason the mission held together, when everything that was supposed to hold it together failed." Maya's jaw was set. Her good hand rested flat on her knee, and he could see the same thing he had seen in the recovery ward 2 days ago. The knuckles, the pressure, the one visible place where the composure was costing her something. "I didn't know that," she said. Her voice was steady. Everything about her was steady, but the words came out quieter than the rest. "I know," Reyes said. "That's why I'm telling you." She stood, moved to the window, and stood with her back to him for a moment, and he let her have that moment without filling it with words. When she turned around, her face was composed and clear, and she looked, for the first time since he had known her, like someone who had put down a weight and not immediately picked up another one to replace it. "Daniel used to say that the point of the job wasn't to be remembered," she said. "He said the point was to make sure the people who mattered made it home. Everything else was extra." A pause. "I thought that was just something Marines said because they didn't have better words for it. But he was right. That's actually the whole point." Reyes stood. He extended his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. Her grip was exactly what he expected. Firm, precise, certain. "Captain Jin Callahan," he said formally. "It has been an honor." Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile exactly. Something older and quieter than a smile. "Sergeant Reyes," she said, "go home. See your people. Do something that has nothing to do with any of this for at least 2 weeks before you come back." "Is that a medical recommendation?" "It is an order from a superior officer," she said, and this time it was close enough to a smile that he counted it as one. He released her hand, moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame because he had made a habit in the last week of stopping at doors, and maybe that was something he would examine later when there was time. "Torres named his daughter after you," he said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out because it was true, and because she needed to hear it, and because some truths are too important to be filed in a classified document that no one would ever read. Maya Jin Callahan stood in the recovery ward of a military hospital in Zamboanga, with a healing shoulder and a retiring cover identity, and the full weight of 14 months of invisible work settling around her. And she heard that a 22-year-old Marine she had kept alive in the rain had looked at his newborn daughter and chosen her name. Her composure did not break. She was too well trained for breaking. But it moved. It shifted the way a structure shifts when it absorbs something it was not built to carry and decides to carry it anyway. "Maya," she said. Just the word. Her own name, said as if she was hearing what it meant for the first time. "Maya," Reyes confirmed. He left her with that. Outside on the flight line, the ordinary machinery of the military continued without pause or acknowledgement of anything that had happened inside that building. Aircraft moved. Personnel moved. The institution that had sent Maya Jin Callahan to a jungle FOB under a name that wasn't hers, and then sealed the record of everything she had done there, continued its vast and indifferent operation, as institutions do. But Torres's daughter would carry her name into a world that would never know why, would grow up in Corpus Christi, or wherever Torres ended up, living a life that existed in its entirety because a 22-year-old woman with steady hands had been exactly where she needed to be, on a night when being somewhere else would have been so much easier. That was the truth that no classification level could contain. Some people do not serve for recognition, or rank, or record. They served because they looked at the place where the need was greatest and understood, without ceremony or announcement, that they were the person who was supposed to go there. And they went. In the dark, in the rain, under fire, under a name that wasn't their own. They went, and the people they saved went home. That is enough. It has always been enough. It will always be exactly enough.